Opinions and statements made by the host and participants in this program are not those of the owners, advertisers, and management company of Sugar City FM 90.3. Nor are such statements necessarily supported or endorsed by the owners, managers, or advertisers of this station. While we encourage all to share their opinions, we do not support any comments that may slander, discriminate, or otherwise offend anyone, and we insist that you refrain from any such statements.
Fellow citizens, near and far, join Newrish Nital on Sugar City 90.3 for Fear No Favor.
Where is the answer? Man, no runner come out for war.
Tune in to 90.3 on your FM dial. Log on to SugarCityFMSankits.com or download Simple Radio app from the Google Play Store. And join Newrish Nital every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. as Newrish Nital tackles the issues and take your calls. Fear No Favor. Every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on Sugar City 90.3 FM.
Welcome to another edition of Fear Nor Favor. Tonight we have quite an interesting topic to deal with. In recent times, maybe for the past 3-4 months, we've been having quite a number of gunshot incidents. And persons do not always get a chance to make it through. However, whenever there is an opportunity to assist someone and try to save their lives, it is not easy either. So we have to be mindful that we should start in our homes and encourage our sons and daughters to be aware that gunshot wounds are very serious, and we must be careful not to carry out such type of wounding. Tonight with me as usual, we have Dr. Natalie Osborne, our general surgeon, and we're going to dig into this topic some more. Doc, welcome again to Fear Nor Favor.
Good night to everyone. Thank you for having me here this evening. So it's happy to be here another Thursday night with you.
Yes, another Thursday. Went missing in action last week, but for good reasons. So we'll definitely make up with an excellent program tonight.
Yes.
And as usual, we have actually come to the conclusion, or we have settled on the fact that we'll do the first half of the program with the good doctor. Remember, she has a very busy schedule and she might be tired at times. So we want her to be here for the first half of the program, whether 10-15 minutes over, that would be nothing. And then I'll carry on with that, and I'll be dealing with the character issues that are rampant throughout the entire Caribbean, maybe throughout the entire world. So, Doc, let us look at it now. What is a gunshot wound?
And I'm happy to say before we start that you brought up such an important point, the importance of this topic and why we chose it for this evening's presentation, because we've had a new uptick again in gun violence in the Federation. It's a really serious problem, and we've had a lot of loss of lives, a lot of our young men and women in the community, And we're hoping that tonight's presentation will fall on some ears that they could make certain changes, and to the young men and women out there who are thinking to go along this path, to discourage them, knowing that the catastrophe that gunshot injuries and wounds do to the lives, not only of the person who's hurt, but to their families and to the community at large. So this evening we're going to be talking about the topic, gunshot wounds and the level of injury that presents oftentimes to us in the medical field.
Okay.
Let's get started then. Good to know.
So what is a gunshot wound?
Well, that's quite easy. A wound that is sustained by a gun or projectile and is often called a ballistic trauma. So any sort of firearm, handguns, various types, once there is an injury to the human body, that is, it results in a gunshot wound.
What are some of the reasons for gun violence?
Oh, the reasons for gun violence are wide and vast, but it's usually as a result of many factors, such as the illegal drug trade. Anywhere that there is illegal activities, there's going to be a lot of gun violence. And the access to firearms. That debate is very rampant in the United States, talking about the access to firearms and the havoc that it has created, and more recently entering into the schools with the gun violence. Substance abuse. Anytime you have alcohol abuse, it's usually it can be associated with gunshot violence. You have the firearm laws. Where their laws are quite loose or unrestricted, there's an increase in firearm injuries and violence. There's also mental health problems where sometimes guns get into the hands of persons who are not mentally well, and it increases violence. Also, it occurs in a lot of societies where there is socioeconomic disparity. Countries that are at war, countries that are in areas that are economically deprived, and where guns are more common, altercations often end in death.
And we had recently, due to the serious situation with gun violence in the U.S. Parliament, they read out 2 members who went on the floor to demonstrate about improving the gun laws and try to protect the lives of our young children.
Correct.
Boys and girls. And surprisingly, they would have the various states that they represented would have voted them back in and sent them back, so they're now back.
That actually happened in the House in Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, and they're actually 2 young black individuals. Right. But that's a different area for a different day.
And when asked about it, though, one of them said that they will have to do the same thing if the need arises. And that is when, that just goes to show how serious gunshot wounds.
And that speaks to the fact that we talk about where gun laws are either very restricted or very loose, because there are other countries who, I remember they speak oftentimes of an incident several years ago in Australia, and after that incident, they had increased their gun laws, and they have had very little mass shootings since then. So there's always this debate in the United States about the gun laws not being tough enough or restrictive enough so that guns get into the hands of persons who do not use them in a correct manner or in a safe manner.
Okay. What are some data surrounding the frequency of gunshot wounds?
Here in our show, we're very big on data because we always want to come with receipts and facts. So we know that worldwide, there's over 250,000 homicides that occur, but just within the age group of 10 to 29 each year. And this is from the World Health Organization. But for each of those individuals who were killed, about 20 to 40 more individuals sustained major injuries requiring hospital treatment. So many of those individuals who were killed was over 250,000. But even those who weren't killed sustained major life-threatening injuries to various degrees, and that is always even more. We know that in 2020 in the United States, over 45,000 persons died as a result of gun violence. That data also includes those that were homicides and those that died as a result of suicide. I also went and collected some local data, and I will take us back from 2011, and this is our local data from the Joseph N. France General Hospital. I want to make clear that this data only represents the persons that were first seen, and treated in the hospital. So I have it separated from 2011 to 2018. So I'll give you that data first. In 2011, there were 32 persons who were seen and treated at the hospital. In 2012, we had a total of 16 persons. And these persons would have been seen. The injuries varied from minor to major. Some persons would have been taken to the operating room. So it's just a collection of all of those individuals that were seen. It doesn't represent at this point the persons that weren't brought to the hospital that died on the scene. So in 2013, we had a total of 13 cases. 2014, there were 18 cases, and we'll see that the numbers were increasing. In 2015, there were 22 cases that were seen and treated in various degrees at the Joseph N. France General Hospital. In 2016, there were 23. 2017, there were 25, and in 2018, there were 33. 25 of those were admitted. Of that 33, 8 were seen and discharged, and about 12 of them had surgical intervention. So I'll give you now from 2019 to currently in 2023, and these are a combination of persons that were seen and treated and the fatalities. In 2019, there were 22 cases. There were 13 that ranged from minor to serious cases, and there were 9 fatalities. In 2020, there were 11 cases. 5 survived, 6 were fatal. In 2021, there were 14 cases. 4 were minor, considered minor to serious, and there were 10 fatalities. In 2022, that's just last year, there were a total of 10 gunshot wound violence due to gun. There were 6 of them that survived, 4 were fatal. And I think to date, in 2023, we're in the month of April, we've had 8 fatality thus far, if my data is correct at this point, which I think that it is. So this data shows for a small community, we're seeing quite a large number of gun violence.
Yes, because we have to be careful. People might say, well, what is 8 fatalities to date? But we have to look at how it is really seen throughout the global community.
Yes.
Because our population is very small, and when you apply that to call it fatality per capita.
Mm-hmm.
It carries more weight, and people. And maybe that is what we have to start telling people, that if we go right now and check where St. Kitts Nevis stands with respect to fatality via gunshot per capita, that they could get the message and see where we're ranked. That just not 8 is 8 per 50,000. So we have to divide and do our mathematics.
Correct. You're so correct with that.
What makes gunshot wounds so devastating, Doc?
Well, very, very good question. When you think about that, one of the most important things you have to think about is a bullet, the velocity. These are high velocity, guns or weapons that you have. The entry point, it all depends on where it enters. It's not the same a gunshot wound, maybe to the hand versus one to the head, of course. So that would make it more devastating if it's to the head. The trajectory, where a bullet or the entry wound occurs, is not necessarily giving you a direct path from one end to the other. So inside the bullet can have a different pathway. The affected anatomy because they're different organs that we know, and we've spoke about many of them throughout our time together, that it may affect. If it affects the heart, it's not the same level of severity if it were to affect the stomach, for example. So the organ that is and the exit point, because we said that you have an entry and an exit point, but it usually doesn't necessarily mean that the bullet, although it goes from one to the other, it may not exactly internally follow that straight path, because the bullet can ricochet or bounce off of bones or different organs, and we'll continue to speak of that more.
Could we take a quick break and come back?
Fellow citizens, near and far, join Newrish Nital on Sugar City 90.3 for Fear No Favor.
Where is the gangster man? Don't run and come out for war.
Tune in to 90.3 on your FM dial. Log on to SugarCityFMSankits.com or download Simple Radio app on the Google Play Store. And join Newrish Nital every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. as Newrish Nital tackles the issues that take your call. Fear No Favor every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on Sugar City 90.3 FM.
Welcome back to Fear No Favor. We'll continue with Dr. Osborne with respect to gunshot wounds. A very important topic, and we are to listen. So when we listen and we understand the serious damage or injuries that can be caused, then we'll be more empathetic towards others in terms of trying to inflict serious gunshot wounds. Now, what are some of the immediate damages caused by gunshot wounds?
Some of the immediate damages caused by gunshot wounds, one of the most significant thing is bleeding. If a person sustains a gunshot wound to a major blood vessels, they can what we call bleed out or exsanguinate in the medical term. This person can lose large volumes of blood in a short period of time, especially if you hit one of the major arteries, okay? And the volumes are pushing or going to the blood vessels at such a high rate. And if one of these blood vessels are injured, it causes a lot of blood, a large volume to be lost. And that person can go into what we call shock, or hypovolemic shock because of the loss of blood, and that person can lose their life. Because what happens, the blood has what we call the hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin, which is a small cell, is responsible for taking oxygen to all of the cells. Oxygen, as you know in science, is vital for maintaining the life of every tissue. So if we do not have enough blood volume, then the tissues lose the ability to have oxygen, and they begin to die. And so that is how the person would meet their demise in such a short space of time. And also, if you injure any major organ, such as your heart, the lung, the liver, you may injure the spinal cord, or even an injury to the brain, that can be very devastating.
It is interesting because we talk about oxyhemoglobin as oxygen being carried around the body by the hemoglobin. But an important aspect to it is the reverse, because if you don't have sufficient blood to rid the body of carbon dioxide, you could well experience carbon dioxide poisoning, Just like how you need a volume of blood to take the oxygen around the body, you need a reasonable volume of blood to have the carbon dioxide leave the carboxyhemoglobin compound. Yeah, devastating effects and results. Yes. What are the common causes of death after a gunshot wound?
We already mentioned one, the immediate blood loss. You go into hypovolemic shock. Another thing that can happen to these individuals, because that leads to severe uncontrollable bleeding, you can also have a collapse of the lung. If a person is shot or sustain a gunshot wound to the chest, the lung could collapse. If the lungs are not functioning well, what happens? We call that a pneumothorax. A person would not have enough oxygen in their body, and if you do not have enough oxygen, that goes to your heart, vital organs, to your brain, to your kidney, and to your liver. This person would die. Another thing that can happen, you can also have any level of injury. You could have injury to the heart. If you have any kind of gunshot wound to the heart, that is most times fatal. The heart is the pump that sends blood to any and all of the blood vessels and all of the organ. If that structure or that organ is injured, the person can bleed out in a matter of minutes and lose their lives. It can result in fractures, major fractures as well too. You could have broken bones as a result of the gunshot wound. If you have a gunshot wound to your spine, the person can become paralyzed based on the level of the injury. So these injuries can be very catastrophic and very hard to manage at times.
Yes, good information.
Mm-hmm.
And we agree. We you see our mood and everything changing as we speak about this.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you are humanitarian at heart and you feel for other human beings and you realize they could be subjected to all these sort of difficulties and complexities, your tone, the timbre and the tone in your voice would change.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are only human. Now some persons feel that you ask, where did they shoot him? In his abdomen, in his head, in his chest. And some of them have the misconception that you cannot get shot in your leg and die from excessive bleeding. I could recall a young man got shot in the Irish Sound area, and it was in his leg, a major artery in the leg, and he was a bit late. He bled profusely. And some people feel that once it's in the leg and not in the abdomen area, that you are safe.
And as we said, the severe uncontrollable bleeding is one of the easiest where a person can succumb to these injuries. You can get shot in the leg and injure major blood vessels, the femoral artery, any one of those important blood vessels, and you bleed uncontrollable, and large volume of blood leaves the body in a short space of time.
But let me ask a question, though. Which one would be prioritized? You got information from the person bringing the body or the person from the scene, and they looked around. Of course, they were looking for collateral information, and they realized that that's a lot of blood that a person would have lost.
Mm-hmm.
You, as a surgeon, would have gotten this information,
Mm-hmm.
but then you still have a gunshot wound, and nowadays there sometimes is 6, 7, 8, 9 bullets meeting inside of a person. Do you try to give that person blood before you even try to do anything else? What is it in a ticklish situation like that? Somebody would have lost copious volumes of blood, but then you still have to make sure the person would not slip away due to the lack of blood.
Of course, that comes to do with the management, as we'll speak about. Of course, that person is usually immediately once they get to the hospital, they're group and cross match, meaning that a blood sample is taken from that person and they're typed and cross match. It's sent to the lab. They try to classify it and see what group type and blood type that person is, and try to get some volumes of blood to replace the blood that is lost. So that is very important.
Okay, good. How are gunshot wounds classified?
Most of the gunshot wounds are classified according to the speed of the projectile, or according to the how fast that bullet leaves the gun, and it's called a classification Gustilo. classification. And it can be a low velocity, medium velocity, and high velocity. And some of us, we can't even imagine how quickly. And we're talking about a bullet that's leaving the gun at a rate of 1,100 feet per second. So that's leaving very, very fast. And that's a low velocity. A medium velocity would leave the gun between 1,200 feet per second and 2,000 feet per second. That is leaving very swiftly. And a high velocity, those I think would be like your AR-15 and those kind of heavy artillery that are used in war, and those can lead to catastrophic injuries. Those are high velocity, and they have a high velocity of over 2,000 feet per second. And that's the most used classification for gunshot wounds.
And sometimes we've been talking about feet, but even if you put it in terms of meters, so persons who are into track and field could get an idea. The high velocity is between 610 meters per second
Yes.
to 1,067 meters per. So just imagine the track that we have, the 400 meter track. The high velocity would start around a lap and a half around the track in just 1 second.
In just 1 second. Yeah.
1 second. Ball took 9.57 seconds to run 100 meters. And you could see in 1 second, a bullet
Yeah.
would pick up that velocity of 610 meters per second around the track. 1.5 plus an extra 10. It's important for us to know, because sometimes persons don't have a clue how people experience these gunshot wounds and what they go through, because some of them just don't make it. But those who would have made it, and you have conversations with them, maybe there's a need sometimes to bring people on national television and have them interviewed, and people could get a little softer towards them and more empathetic after they would have realized the kind of suffering the person would have gone through.
Yeah, and even if that would dissuade some of the others from, how would I say this, from allowing themselves to go to that extent and harming someone else with a gun. Because ultimately, our discussion here is to dissuade anyone from using these high velocity, high velocity guns, or all these kind of things that can be used to harm someone else. Because the objective is to inform and educate, so ultimately we can have a reduction in these violent crimes.
Persons are often curious about the entry and exit wounds. What can you say to that curiosity to satisfy?
Yes, because oftentimes people, and it is important in medicine and especially in forensic science, if someone ultimately meet their demise or expire as a result of gunshot wound, this information is very important later on for litigation and stuff like that. So the entrance wound is usually a smaller wound, okay? And it's usually quite symmetrical or round and nicely shaped. And it usually can have the gunpowder residue there, and you could have what you call an abrasion ring, especially if it is done close up, okay? And there's something that's called a tattooing also, when the gunpowder sprays around the area of the wound. So you will hear sometimes, even you're watching these CSI crime movies, or even locally, you see that it was a close range injury, a gunshot wound, because they can see there's evidence of the tattooing or the gunshot powder that is left there at the entrance of the wound.
But it is hot.
Yes.
It is hot.
And it leaves a ring around the entrance area if it is close contact, if it was done in close contact. But the entrance one is usually very smaller and is well defined or very symmetric.
What about the exit wound?
Well, the exit wound, as compared to the entrance wound, is usually much larger, and it normally can be. It's not so symmetrical. It's always kind of frayed out, oftentimes too. What happens as the bullet travels inside, the bullet loses some of its speed, some of the speed, and there's a lot of fragmentation. So the skin is a bit ragged, and it often bleeds more than the entrance wound.
Okay, and you use the word here, fragmentation, because sometime when we would have, well, doctors would have felt that they would have traveled the trajectory to make sure that everything came out. I had a very good friend who got shot and had to travel to Trinidad, and there was some fragment left in his throat. And in the IC unit in Trinidad, they had to give him bread to assist in the movement because he could not eat, but he would have come around nicely, a very personal friend of mine, and a little soup sometime, and it took a while. It took a while for him to actually talk again because those fragments were creating problems. Do we go and search for fragments, or they're a little bit too small for us to?
When in this instant, when we speak about fragmentation, is fragmentation of the wound itself. It's frayed out, it's destroying, because what happens with the bullet or the gunshot, there is tissue damage, and there's fraying of the tissues, damage to the bone, damage to the ligaments, damage to the muscles. That is, you speak of the fragmentation, the bullet fragment.
Yes.
The bullet itself, most times, because it's a metal, it doesn't so much break up into pieces like that. It's not usually, the bullet doesn't. But when we're doing or dealing with a gunshot wound and a gunshot victim, we're not so much looking for the bullet. We're treating the injuries that the bullet would have caused because of its trajectory. And that is what you focus on.
Okay. Now, initial assessment for a gunshot wound. Tell us about the approach.
It usually follows any acute trauma using the Advanced Trauma Life Support, or what we call the ATLS system or protocol. And we have our A, B, C, D, E. And it's something that you want to keep in mind. Well, anyone who can assist in first instance on the scene too, you want to make sure that the airway, and that is the A, assess and protect the airway and the cervical spine, just to ensure that if there's any injury to the neck, you want to make sure that that injury, that neck area is protected so that the person doesn't become paralyzed, for example. So the airway, making sure that the person can breathe, there's nothing inside of their mouth blocking the airway passage, maybe sometimes the tongue, so you may have to reposition the head. The breathing, of course, that is B. You want to make sure that the person is getting adequate ventilation. You'll often see when the EMS or the paramedics get to the scene, they give the person oxygen, make sure that the person is well oxygenated. And C is the circulation that you mentioned earlier as well. Because the gunshot wound can result in quite severe blood loss, immediately you want to make sure that you canalize or you get some IV access up so that you can give the person volume using your normal saline. You give them their fluids, and you can also then give them blood to replace the blood that is lost. That is very important. So those are some of the things you want to do immediately. You want to take off blood samples. You want to do what we call group and match the person, get their blood type, and to ensure that if it is necessary, you can get blood to transfuse them. You want to do a quick neurological examination as well. That would be the D, checking for the disability, to ensure that the injury from the gunshot wound may not have caused any nerve injury or any level of paralysis. You want to see if the person can move their lower limbs, move their upper limbs, if they're able to feel when you touch them, just to ascertain if there is any level of injury, if there's any nerve injury or spinal cord injury. And you want to also expose the person. You want to not only, because if you're thinking that there's a gunshot wound to the chest, you cannot just assume that that is the only wound you have. You want to make sure that you're exposed and you look both anteriorly and posteriorly, because oftentimes we forget that there is the posterior trunk, and you want to ensure that there is no gunshot wound to the back, to the buttock, to the posterior leg. So you want to be able to evaluate that. And that would be the E for exposure, making sure you do not miss any injury.
So the EMT persons are the ones who would take off the clothing and
Well,
make
that's
sure.
for the first assessment once you get on the scene. Because usually their job is to stabilize. They can stabilize, make the assessment on the scene, connect an IV, give the person oxygen, more stabilize the cervical spine, their neck area, get them into the ambulance and get them as quickly as possible to the emergency room where the medical care would be continuous and definitive.
But there'll be communication.
Of
from
course.
this point
Yes, to
until
give you an
whenever you get
idea
there.
what injury to expect, what is the condition or the level of stability of the patient which you're bringing to the emergency room, so that the staff at the hospital can be alerted as to what to expect.
And the hospital can be properly staffed. Because not everybody might be around.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Let us take a break and come back, please.
Fellow citizens, near and far, join Newrish Nital on Sugar City 90.3 for Fear Nor Favor.
Where is one? Here is the answer, man. No runner come out for war.
Tune in to 90.3 on your FM dial. Log on to SugarCityFMSaykits.com or download Simple Radio app from the Google Play Store. And join Newrish Nital every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. as Newrish Nital tackles the issues and take your call. Fear Nor Favor every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on Sugar City 90.3 FM.
Would you stand up and see your country dying and never let a heroin happen? Would you see your children's future dwindling, creating much disease?
Good evening, welcome back to Fear Nor Favor with our General Surgeon, Dr. Natalie Osborne. Don't forget those of
Good
you who
evening.
are don't forget those of you who are listening can call 466-0903 and be a part of our discussion. I know many of you are glued to the radios. Most of you promised me that you would be listening because you feel that this was an all-important program, especially since we're going through this new wave of criminal activities. Anyhow, we invite you to call in, be a part of the discussion. If you do not get a chance to call in, of course, it is streamed live, so you can always go back and give it a listen at your own convenience. Okay, but we'll prefer if you call in and be able to get some responses from the good doctor. Is there any repercussion to be had if someone was summoned to come to the hospital to properly staff the hospital to deal with a gunshot injury? You call somebody and they say they're not coming, or do we get responses like that, or we have some
I'm not clear.
dedicated?
No, well, in terms of the staff to come in,
Yes, because you might need a diversity of staff, and some person might just say they're not going anywhere.
no, we don't know that level of discipline. This job requires a level of discipline. It's actually a calling. So usually that person who is either the technician, whether in the blood bank, the radiology department, even the staff, the doctors, the nurses. No, these persons are usually very dedicated to the task at hand, so we don't really have that problem,
And some
especially in
of
such
them
a
might
quiet.
have already been at the site already, at
Yes.
the hospital.
Yes.
And some of them on call as well.
Yeah. So then the person who's on call, if the person is doing an on-call, which we call ambulatory, they come in as needed, but their staff there usually covering the hospital in the emergency room on the units 24/7. But the extra staff for the operating room or the surgeons will come in as needed.
As needed. That is why Dr. Wilkinson couldn't take more than 10 days maximum vacation in the 25 years of carrying out surgery. Now, is there any valuable information one can get from the scene for medical purposes?
Oh yes, yes. And we alluded to that earlier when the EMS gets to the scene, maybe, or even an onlooker, because sometimes an onlooker may be there giving the first assistance to the individual or to the victim, and they can call 911 and they can describe what they've seen, where the injury is, the location, and the condition. But once the EMS or the emergency staff gets to the site, they can assess the patient, do their vital signs, get an idea of the level of stability. They can also look and see the loss of blood or the blood that is there on the scene. That is always important because they could give you an idea how much blood volume, how much loss the person would have had. And then you have their vital signs, looking to see their blood pressure, if that is stable or that is lower, or if the heart is racing, suggests that the blood volume is has decreased significantly, so the heart is pumping faster to maintain the blood pressures.
You know, it is important that we talk about that because some persons may rush to a scene, some persons may visit or witness the scene of a gunshot wound. And they need to know that whatever they're observing can provide collateral information to the appropriate and relevant parties when they actually come, and be willing to share. Well, he was, let me just say briefly, there was an incident in Lodge, and the soldier was left there maybe to die, and a passerby saw him and put him in the seated position, took him from on his back and put him in the seated position, and it is claimed that maybe that gesture might have gone a long way in helping him to be alive today, because the blood could have gone down in his lungs and drowned him, so to speak.
Okay.
Some complications.
Yes.
Yeah, so sometimes onlookers, witnesses would have to understand that they could at least do something until the professionals
Okay.
come. And that is why programs like these are very interesting and important, informative. Not that we're going around hoping that we'll meet somebody with a gunshot wound, but things happen, sometimes innocently. You understand? Are there specific management of gunshot wounds based on the location?
Oh, of course, yes. It all depends on where the person sustained the gunshot wound. And it all depends. So if someone sustained a gunshot wound in the neck, that would be considered a very particularly dangerous area because of what? The high number of vital organs that you have in the neck. Just think about it. You have the spinal cord, you have the esophagus or the pipe, the tube that takes the food down. You have the trachea, or what we call the windpipe. You have a lot of blood vessels, major blood vessels that are passing through the neck, and a lot of collateral nerves and accessory nerves there. And if those are injured, that can be catastrophic to the person. A lot of the cranial nerves and the nerves that goes to the brain, they pass right through there. And if there's an injury there, the person it can result in immediate death, or the person can become paralyzed. It can result in having difficulty breathing because there's injury injury to the windpipe, and those damage and those injuries can be catastrophic, and you have to keep those in mind as the medical team, once a person gets to the hospital. As we said, your management would be including your ABCs, which is your airway, making sure the airway is clear. If some of these persons, you may have to intubate or put a tube down so that they can breathe. Some of these persons, depend on the injury. You must have seen somebody in your lifetime have a tube inside of their neck that goes into their windpipe. We call that a tracheostomy. So different levels, and that is all to save the person's life. If the person has injury as a result of the gunshot wound to the food pipe or the esophagus, they may have a feeding tube going directly into their stomach, because you may not be able to use that area for a while until it is healed. So those are areas with a lot of structures, and that the complications are very severe. Even if the person survived, they can be left with lifelong complications and injuries, okay? So it all depends on where it is. If you have an injury to the chest, you may ask to, because you have important structures there. You have your ribs, you have your major organs that are inside the chest, like the heart, you have the lungs. If you injure the lung, the person can have difficulty breathing. Of course, we know if we injure the heart, the person can bleed out and die immediately. Anything like, you also have the spinal cord that passes there. So these are vital organs you want to think about. So the person can have, the lung can collapse, you can have cardiac injury, you can injury to the nerves, you can also have injury to the, what we call the same windpipe, because it enters the chest. You can have injury to the esophagus or the food tube. You could have injuries to any one of these major blood vessels. And also if you speak about the abdomen. So these are all vital areas. You get a shot in the abdomen, that can lead to an injury to the stomach, to the bowel, to the liver, to the spleen, and to the kidneys, because you have no idea what the bullet or where the bullet would go once it enters into the body. And hence, that is why oftentimes these patients may not even make it to the secondary, to the healthcare institution to get any sort of assistance, because if you injure any of these vital structures, the person can die immediately. And that is why this topic is so important, to discourage the use of these deadly weapons in our community.
I just have a question obliquely, related but obliquely. We often hear about the lungs collapsing. Sometimes I view the lungs as if it is a bladder, and a hole is in the bladder. So even if you blow, the air will come back out. It might hold a little, but some will come back out. It's just time alone that you can heal a collapsed lung, or you can do things to expedite the healing process of a collapsed lung.
Well, the lung can be seen almost like a balloon. Think about it like that. Balloon is expanded because the lung is filled with air. It has all these little small units that are filled with air, little sacs, okay, that are filled with air. And this air is responsible. When you breathe in, this air, there's an exchange, and it goes to the blood, and then it's distributed, all this oxygen that all the vital organs and structures need. So if there is an injury to the lung, like a balloon, you puncture the balloon, and the balloon shrinks down or collapses because the air leaves it. The same way with the lung, if you injure the lung, it can collapse. And then it cannot do the function of doing the gas exchange and allowing the good oxygen to get into the vital organs and to get rid of the carbon dioxide and get it out of the body.
But the healing can be accelerated. People usually recover from collapse.
Yes. So the idea is that you do what you need to do. Usually we have to put a tube, all depends on the level of injury. You may have to open the chest, or oftentimes we put a chest tube. You may have gone and seen someone with a tube inside of their chest that is leading outside into a container. You could put a chest tube there until the injury to the lung itself heals. It's just like any injury to the, you have a cut on the skin, over time that would heal.
So can the lungs be sutured?
Yes, lung.
Yeah, that is what I was getting
Oh, that's
at.
what you want to know. If the
Yeah,
lung
or
can.
just steady around with
No.
the passage of time.
But it all depends on the severity and how large the injury is or the segment that is damaged. Yes, the lung can be sutured.
Good information. Extremities.
Or, of course, you can have, we spoke about this earlier, you can have an injury or gunshot wound to any of the extremities. What we call the extremities, the hands, the legs, and the feet, those are the extremities. You can have injury to them leading to long-term complication. A person may have a gunshot wound to their leg, which result in a limb loss. We've had persons who have lost their limb as a result, and that leads to long-term disability. You can have injuries to your nerves as well too. The person may not be able to walk as they would. Okay, so it all depends on the amount, the area that the bullet has injured and the severity of the injury. As you said earlier, we may think that if you get a shot to the limb, you may not die, but that could lead to the death of the person if they injure a major blood vessel and the person bled out.
Let us. Somebody comes and there's emergency. There's the urgency of now. The emergency of now. And a limb is there to be removed unless you can create more complication. Do you have to wait until a family member, next of kin, comes to give permission to do what you have to do? Are there laws to protect surgeons in the event that they have to make a hasty decision, an emergency decision? Do we try to save the procedure until the person can really get back to himself or herself and have a discussion as to what might have to be removed? What is it like?
Well, usually you will have to have some form of consent. If the person is conscious and they're of sound mind at that particular time, they can give consent. The next of kin would also be able to give consent to that person. And once you're given consent, it usually, you want to, for example, in an elective surgery, you say you're going to do a hernia repair and you have a consent to do that. But also, even when you're doing a particular thing that you think you're going to do, but they may arise other findings, other complication. And in that time, you have to do what you need to do to save the person's life. If you're going in and there's an injury to a major blood vessel in the limb, you may have to amputate. So you want to keep that in mind, and you want to give the family members or even the patient, if they are conscious, an idea the extent of the injury and what are the possible outcomes. And sometimes you cannot give a clear answer until you go in because you're not sure the level of injury.
Sometimes time is against you.
Correct. So that's why I'm telling you, you will let the family know this is what we're going in, but we may have to do something
You might
more.
not even have an idea who the person's family is. Because you got to start the procedure right away. Emergency, urgency of now.
But
Are
there's
there
is a
laws,
super-
are there actions to protect the surgeon in the event that where you have to do this and it could be discussed later, but do what you have to do now?
Yes, usually you would have to do what you have to do, but it's a small community. There's usually somebody who comes by. You try to have access to someone, and if the person can give the consent, but you usually want to have consent. That's the best thing to do, to protect yourself and to protect the institution later on.
The court is very much on the doctor's side when it comes to these things, I could tell you.
Okay,
I did
it's
some
good to
great
know.
investigation. I did some cases, read up some cases, and they have a lot of respect for doctors and other medical staff who are trying desperately with a time constraint to save a life. Now, run me through what happens from the time you receive a call that there is a gunshot wound victim.
Well, usually the call comes first to the EMS, to their department, okay? And they call that there is a person, they give you the location where this is happening. So you know, okay, this is happening in Sandy Point, in Cayenne, wherever it is. And the staff immediately leaves out, okay? That is usually communicated with the emergency room staff as well. The nurses are there, that they're going out in the field to see a gunshot victim. The person, they get there and then they assess the patient. They get the patient stabilized as best they can. They move the patient to the vehicle, and of course they're calling back because there are several staff members and they assign different tasks in managing the patient. They call back to the base, which is at the hospital, giving us an idea what is going on and what is the condition of the patient. Then the patient get back to the hospital immediately. You have the nurses that are there in the emergency room and the ER physician. They start assessing the patient, doing the ABCs that we spoke about, the airway, the breathing, the circulation, making sure that the person, the level of disability, if there is any neurological deficit, any spinal cord injury, they're examining the patient, they're assessing the patient, removing the clothes, looking to see if there's any and all injuries and documenting this at the same time. Then the radiology staff may be called in, depending on what the needs are. If you need x-rays of different parts of the body, you can get that staff in. If you need definitely you're going to need the laboratory staff at that point and the staff for the blood bank. So you group and cross-match the patient. Ensure if you need blood, you have blood accessible there. And in that instance, all depends on where the injury is and the severity of the injury. Not all gunshot wounds may need to go to the the operating room. If you don't need the operating room staff, the physician in the emergency room can handle the case, stabilize the patient, clean the wound, assess the wound. Oftentimes, then they communicate with the specialist or the consultant via telephone. Based on the level of injury, you may have to call in the operating room staff. The surgeon comes in, and then you have the anesthetist or the doctor that would put the patient to sleep. And the surgeon can be anyone. There are different surgical specialties. You have the orthopedic surgeon, or that's a surgeon for bones. You have the general surgeon, which I'm one of them that are there at the hospital. You may have the urology as well, too. Depends on the level of injury. You have several different persons. And of course, that team works together. And we try to stabilize the patient and do the best for the patient at that point. We also have staff like the orderlies who are very important there, helping to transport the patient from the emergency room to the operating room or to the radiology department, etc. You have the staff, once a case is done, we have the cleaning staff who's responsible for tidying up after. So it's a whole team that is working together to make sure that the patient is cared for as efficiently and effectively as possible. And this also takes a toll on the staff at the end of the day, the trauma that persons are seeing, the lasting impact that it has as well too.
Before I come back to take the baton from where you ended, now there's a tendency or policy that when the EMT, when they go out, you may have a gunshot wound, and they might have difficulty establishing a pulse for whatever reason. Pressure could have gone so low. Is it a tendency not to, once you would have realized that somebody passed, to just come back without them and let the dead horse go to pick them up? I saw an incident, and it really touched my heart in the Modern area, where two persons died from a particular accident, but one person was a little baby, and they turned off and left the baby there on the ground because the baby had died. You know,
But I know the emotion. We got to separate being emotional to the actual responsibility of the staff, because the EMS, whether they're here anywhere in the world, if they're assessing the patient, if the patient has succumbed to their injuries, that patient is not transported in the ambulance back to the institution. That has a different process where the corridor comes in and the hearse comes in our local setting, and that the remains is then taken up and then taken to the forensic lab or taken back to the morgue and to be assessed and stuff. So I know sometimes emotionally it may look hard, but the medical team normally are not responsible once the person has succumbed to the injuries. Okay.
But you could have turned off, and 20 seconds after the person die, he's on the way to the hospital. But him,
Yes, but
him
you
within-
still, but you still have a responsibility to care for that person once they're still alive, and the person can also succumb to their injuries on the way to the
the
institution. We've had that incident as well, or as soon as they get in. But once a person still has life within them, and you do your assessment, and the person still has a pulse, the person is responsible. You still have that medical responsibility. Once a person has succumbed to the injury, the EMS is no longer responsible for them medical legally.
Yeah, okay. You take the person onto the ambulance, and you try to stabilize, so to speak, while the
Correct.
person is there. But then you realize even before you turn off, the person might have passed. Do you take them back over the ambulance and rest
You're
them
getting
on the
into
floor?
so much little
I asked him
areas like
because-
that. But that's why I said in medicine, oftentimes we have to be careful to be mature and to separate some of these emotions, because if you are en route, the person still comes. But if the person has succumbed to the injury, there is no benefit in keeping the person or being in the EMS or the paramedic service, and that service is responsible for caring for the living. You understand? But if the person has succumbed to their injuries, so I really don't want to get into those little minor thing. Our main goal of this discussion is the prevention. And my job is to let our listening audience to know that gunshot wounds can be catastrophic. Gunshot wound kills, guns kill, and we have to find a way to prevent that, because it's affecting our small community. It's putting a strain on our resources. It is affecting the mental, psychological health of the staff who has to continuously deal with them. Even the EMS, when they go on the scenes, oftentimes they get there before the police officers, and they themselves can be fearful because they don't know what they're going into on the scene. So our job here in this discussion is to dissuade our young men and women, let them understand that most of the time when you cause such injury, there's no turning back. Apologizing doesn't save the person or bring back the person to life. We want to prevent some of these injuries. So that is our focus here, that we want to ensure that we limit the amount of gunshot violence we have in our community, and those in the medical field, that we continue to work to save as many lives as we can with the limitations that we have in our healthcare facilities.
When you would have had the EMT, they visited a scene, and they would have brought back a patient for the doctors to look after. Even the surgeon who has to carry out his function and try to help that person, to some extent, that is traumatic.
Correct.
Are these workers provided with therapy?
Well, there oftentimes, if there are certain catastrophic events, I remember several years ago with the staff, there was someone who came in and shot at someone inside the hospital. Yes, the staff was provided with the support system with our counselors and stuff like that. But the everyday staff, oftentimes, no, we don't have a specific counselor that you usually just go to if you desire, which I think some of those cases we would need to have somebody more for the staff to support them with these traumatic injuries.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes,
it could impact
correct.
them a month later, 6 months later, a year later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that should be in place. I think that is something that should be in place. I have spoken to many nurses, several doctors, who say that they can really do with some therapy for their experience in the post-traumatic stress disorder. Unless you're a psychopath and you could just stomach all of that and nothing transfer to your mind. You know?
Some of us, we don't have the luxury of having that. We have to keep it moving, some persons, but ultimately all of us need that kind of psychological support.
Well, what do we have to say to the young men what do we have to say to them? When you are given the information that there was a shooting and you already got the call, and you ready in the environment to facilitate, and then you get the news that the person didn't make it.
That often happens.
We have to send a message to them as well. Let them know that when they carry out these stuff, they impact the medical staff at the hospital, especially when you hear the person did not make it. It is even worse that you feel like you didn't even get a chance to assist. No, we are human beings. We are human beings, and I think a strong message will have to be sent. We have to start producing videos and let people know the kind of impact it is having, whether somebody is a professional in that particular area and a master the profession. We still have to invoke empathy to come from people. You just cannot say, well, they're going to look after you. That should not be the end story. We have to try more. And our surgeons, the orthopedic surgeon, the urologist, the general surgeon, at times they should come on the television and explain to these young men that your task is difficult because there is always a percentage on the other side. Yes, the 90%, 10% chance. Good. But even in a 90, 10%, the 10% could take over the 90. Even though the chance of the person surviving might have been 90, for whatever reason, you could have a shift. Let them know it's not always 100% that you can look after somebody when they come to the hospital and try to restore life to their bodies. They need to hear that, and we're not telling them sufficient. We're not telling them sufficient number of times. We need to get out and say what we have to say. And I think that is something that we should look forward to organizing. This is a good example. This program is a good example. You understand? And we need to have it accentuated more often, bring people.
And we need to reach out in the schools very early to the young men and women in the high schools, in the primary schools, discussing these things in the churches. So in those social bodies, those units that make up the community, it's very important to reach out to them and get information like this across to them. Okay, so that they could understand the impact of these violent activities, not just on the person,
And
but
the
it's the
resources,
on the resources and the community at large.
Because it would be unfair for somebody to have elective surgery that is scheduled for today, at a particular time. Then all of a sudden somebody comes in a gunshot wound and you have to recalibrate your preference scale. Family members might not be happy. They might understand, but they would not be happy. Why these persons are doing this, but we're giving them priority and putting other people's life at risk to a certain extent. It might be a safe and straightforward surgery, but also it could be one where the surgery was needed. Family
Correct.
members don't want to sit and consume those kind of things all the time. And we're using up resources. Because the same resources you're going to use to look after the person with the gunshot wound might be the last of something that you had to use. So the person who waiting for the elective surgery might not be able to get it without what you call improvisation, so to speak. I mean, we should always be properly told, but there are always times when stock might not be recuperated in a timely manner, and you have to just make a choice. We are not perfect, and at times you might have to improvise to save someone's life.
But ultimately, as the staff of the Joseph Infant, the JNF General Hospital, we do our best to support everyone, all of the patients that come into the institution, whether they be emergency, urgency, or elective surgeries. But our ultimate goal is to discourage and dissuade the gun violence in our community, and to inform the young men and women who think about committing these violent acts that the outcome is not usually good. You lose your chances of having a successful life. There is imprisonment at the end of it as well too. And usually anything to do with gun violence never ends well for anybody, and it affects not only you as the individual who may have chosen to commit such a violent act, it affects your family, your friend, your community who may have been supporting you throughout your life. So our word would be just to encourage everyone to choose patience, kindness, love, thoughtfulness over reacting so aggressively and violently. And violence does not solve the problems usually.
Maybe next time we might have to do knife injuries, because when we had the frequency of the killing, gun violence, we heard about a stabbing. So everybody started thinking now that is harm reduction, because then it's a knife. But then what eventually happened? The person lost his life.
Correct.
So there's no harm reduction in choosing to use a knife over a gun, because you could seriously and fatally injure someone.
Correct.
So no harm reduction in that. I don't like that term, and we shouldn't be pushing it as if to say use the knife and not the gun. We need not
we want to
use
discourage,
any of
yes,
them.
all level of violence.
Yeah.
All level of violence.
All. Well, your parting words, we have come to the end of our session, and I know that you can do well with your rest. And I really enjoy this. I think I'm going to look at this thing a few more times. And I know that my little 11-year-old son is in tune, because the last killing we had, he was by my home, and he said, "Daddy, I heard 3 gunshots." And he said, I think that they use a particular type of gun. Well, he said the gun hold 5, that gun holds 5 rounds, but he only heard 3. Only for me to get a text message, 5 minutes after, to confirm that there was a shooting in the neighborhood over at Soho Dorset area. They was and the children then becoming paranoid. You drop something in the kitchen and it sound a kind of way. Everybody start to scatter. We feeling the environment with paranoia.
Yeah, and lots of fear. Yes,
Right.
that's what we don't want.
Yeah, we don't want that for the kids.
No.
You got kids telling you they want to stay home. You see, we need to spell out the ramification of all these things. Kids don't want to go to school. We had this workshop, and this doctor, she has a doctorate in psychology. So she don't want the schools in the rural areas. A fellow in grade 4 was in charge of a gang. The fellows them in law classes in grade 4. That's about 9 years. And they decide how the school is going to be operated on that day. A 9-year-old commanding grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 students. And they have to do what he says. We have to try to bring this thing. And sometimes you have persons higher up, senior, they're pushing them, they have the symbol between here. But if you don't know, you don't know. But I wanted to tell them today that it might not have been just a grade 4 person, you might have had a senior member who was indoctrinating him. But then if you don't look between them, you don't see the symbol, you might not know. But we have come to the end. We're going to give you a chance to... And then we do what we have to do for next week. I hope next week we'll have another instructive, informative topic that our people can learn from. As a matter of fact, somebody met me and told me that they wanted to call in the last time that you were on. When you're talking about
What were we talking about?
Hernia? Yeah, they wanted to call in. And they were driving, so they didn't get a chance. So we can't assume that if you don't get a call, you don't have hundreds of persons listening. Okay? So any parting words for the
Well,
young
I think,
men?
it's for everybody. It's violence is not, I know it affects more the younger generation, but we as an entire community, which is very important, we cannot just see it as a particular group of persons. What affects anyone in the community affects all, because this violence will eventually spill over to everyone and the quote unquote the ordinary persons. So we all have to come together to combat against this violence in every sector, in the churches, in the homes, in the educational centers, in the hospitals, because it will affect each one of us. We never expected that someone would come into the hospital at a particular time with a live gun and firing it after someone. So this is thing that if it continues, it is going to become more and more prominent, and persons are going to be more and more blatant with their violent activities. So we all need to band together, the team, and find ways of discouraging or ending the gun violence. So that would be my parting words, so that we as a medical team, we would not have to deal with this and have persons losing their lives and having families being devastated and putting on a strain on the healthcare facility and the staff, which is such a small staff, and oftentimes we're limited as well too. So my best wishes to everyone in the community that we all live in. You know, we all love our islands of St. Kitts and Nevis, and we want us to continue to live together in peace and harmony and do not have all these violent activities. That's my parting word. All right, so.
Our touristic products.
Yes.
You don't
Okay.
want...
So have a good night, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Fellow citizens, near and far, join Newrish Nital on Sugar City 90.3 for Fear No Favor.
Where is one? Where is the dance of a no runner come out for war?
Tune in to 90.3 on your FM dial. Log on to SugarCityFMSankits.com or download Simple Radio app from the Google Play Store. And join Newrish Nital every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. as Newrish Nital tackles the issues and take your call. Fear No Favor. Every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on Sugar City 90.3 FM. fellow citizens, near and far. Join Newrish Nital on Sugar City 90.3 for Fear No Favor.
Where is gone? Where is the dancer man? No runner come out for war.
Tune in to 90.3 on your FM dial. Log on to SugarCityFMSakeits.com or download Simple Radio app from the Google Play Store. And join Newrish Nital every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. as Newrish Nital tackles the issues and take your call. Fear No Favor. Every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on Sugar City 90.3 FM.
Welcome back to Fear No Favor. Now we want to look a bit at the Kawifta. And there were many controversies. There were many explanations. And there were several biases shown against other athletes in preference to the Bahamians. And we want to take time out to listen to Lance Whitaker when he questioned the director of the Kawifta meet. And just listen and try to make. But before we do that, I would like to say congratulations to Samuel Francis, who brought back our gold medal, and there was a young lady. I think she brought back a bronze. The youngster, Marvin Bennett, son, I think he is. His father used to be a sprinter. I think he would have gotten a silver medal. So we want to say congratulations to them. And we are hoping that that can be the momentum we have going into Grenada for the next Carifta Games come next year. But there were many controversies. And let us give a listen to Lance Whitaker with respect to that same situation.
So we're starting today's Sports Max Zone with an assessment of the 50th edition of the Carifta Games in Nassau, Bahamas that ended Monday night, the three-day showpiece of the Caribbean's finest young athletes. Brilliant with many high points, but tainted by some controversy as well, with many fans and officials from around the region left perplexed regarding a few of the incidents that took place. Now, one of those, the boys under 20, 4 by 100-meter final, that was won by Jamaica, being called into question with the Bahamas lead-off man Zachary Evans stumbling forward and not leaving the blocks. The race was called back with the runners halfway through their opening leg. Later that evening, a protest was launched by fourth-place Barbados, who missed the bronze by 0.02 of a second, noting they did not have enough time to recover from a faulty start. And meet officials agreed to have a rerun the following day, Sunday, but the teams refused to participate, leading to much unwanted confusion around one of the premier events at the meet. Now, there was also an incident involving St. Kitts under-17 boy, Jalen Bennett, who was left off the start list for the 200-meter final and subsequently had to run alone during the closing ceremony. And earlier Monday, it was confirmed that the Jamaican Shaquan Gordon, who got bronze in the 110-meter hurdles on Monday, was disqualified hours after the race had already concluded. So here to help us understand what took place is the competition director for this year's Carifta Games, David Charlton. David, Carifta, always fabulous. This one, no different. So before we uncover the controversial side, what were the good things about this world-class three-day meet for you?
Well, one of the great things is that we've been getting compliments from the local and international fans about how great the meet was executed. Even though, like you said, behind the scenes, there were a lot of challenges, but we met them all head on. And at the end of the day, I believe that the LOC gave the track and field fans a fantastic track event.
Yeah, and what the fans obviously embracing the event because Bahamas also celebrated the 50th year of its independence. So it was a festive feeling for the Bahamians, and a lot of medals won by the Bahamians, certainly more than you did the last year and the last Carifta Games before that.
Yes, this is the best we've done in quite a number of years. So it was exciting to be a part of it. As a matter of fact, the first time we ever won Carifta, I was a member of that team. So it certainly was exciting to be a part of this grand 50th event.
Yeah, that was way back in 1984, David. So you're aging yourself at the moment. But
1980 in Bermuda.
Okay, 80. Okay, yeah. All right. Even well, a little later, but 84 was the last time that the Bahamians actually topped the medal table. About those issues now, let's start with that 4x1 because I saw you on television explaining on Sunday morning the position as meet director regarding that 4x100 rerun. We know that the Barbados team had made a protest in the evening, Sunday. Can you take us through that process and what would have triggered the officials' decision to rerun the race? Because it apparently was very unpopular.
Yeah, well, as you know, and correctly mentioned that the lead-off leg did not leave the blocks, his hand did not leave the track. So that was deemed not a false start. Now, there was some delay in calling the race back, but the race was, he was not disqualified, and it was rerun based on the decision of the starter. Barbados felt that because they had ran 80 meters and the Bahamas did not run 80 meters, that they were at a disadvantage. So their leadoff runner would not have had the recovery time as the Bahamian leadoff runner would have. So they thought that they were put at a disadvantage, and therefore they protested. The the jury of appeal concluded that because the Bahamian athlete did not leave the blocks, he should not be disqualified, and the race should be run over. We then subsequently asked all of the teams to make contact with all of the teams and asked them to declare whether or not they would be showing up to run. A number of the teams said, one or two of the teams said that yes, they are available. We could not get a commitment from Barbados to say that they would definitely run. So in that light, it was decided not to run the race over.
Yeah, I saw you trying to explain the situation on Sunday morning, David, and it did appear to me as if the decision to rerun the race was not hard and fast. There was something about your narrative that suggested that you were awaiting to see if the teams would actually do a rerun. So what?
That is correct. We had asked the teams. First of all, we made contact with all the team officials and informing them that the race would be rerun. And hours before the race, we asked them to declare their teams to run. And like I said, a few of the teams did put their statements in that they will be available to rerun.
But David, but David, why would Barbados protest and then not seem interested in the rerun?
Well, you'll have to ask Barbados that. I will have to ask them that, because we did ask them to declare their team, which they did not do.
All right, shall we move on then to the other? What about the St. Kitts athlete who had to run all alone? How did that happen? Because I don't think I've ever seen that in Carifta Games history.
But it's the timing officials missed out on him. There was another athlete who did not qualify for the finals, and his name was down on the start list. The coach it was the athlete from Martinique. The coach came in and indicated that his athlete did not deserve to be in that spot, and he would and did not earn that spot. So we then reported it to the timing officials, who went through their photo finishes, and it was found that he did not earn the spot in the finals, and it was a St. Kitts athlete that earned the spot. We then redid the start list, and at the end of the day, we failed to make contact with the St. Kitts athlete, informing him that he had made the finals. We did have some communication challenges at the meet, and I think this all was a part of our shortcoming. You know, as a meet director, I have to take full responsibility for that. We failed that athlete, and at the end of the day, that athlete wanted to run that race. It was until the finish of the race, the 200, that the athlete coaches learned that he got a did not show, and they lodged a protest. The athlete wanted to run, and by all means, we made all effort to ensure that athlete had himself the opportunity to run at the Carifta Games. He had the slowest time qualifying for the finals, and he ended up after his run with a 4th place finish, an official time at the Carifta Games.
Sir David, I'm trying to understand something here, and I just want you to help me with this process. Did the starters have leeway to use discretion in their decision-making?
What race? The 200?
No, just generally.
Well, if you're talking generally, yes, starters do have, according to IWF rules, they do have they can use their discretions at certain times. And if you're talking in particular about the 4x1, yes, the starter did use his discretion and disqualifying the Bahamas and rerunning the races right then.
And that's what I'm talking about in terms of the possibility of certain races going into disrepute because of the use of said discretion, because then it would seem as if some athletes or nations would get preferable treatment as opposed to others. Would you agree?
Well, the IWF rulebook allows the starter to make that decision. At the start of every race, there's an ATO who is responsible to oversee the start of the races. So it's not just the starters, the ITOs who also can have a say in these decisions.
The 110-meter hurdles in particular, the Jamaican youngster Shaquane Gordon was disqualified hours after the race concluded. Apparently, because of a false start. That's what we're hearing. What would have led to that decision being made or being communicated to the athlete long after the race was finished?
Well, there was a protest was lodged by the Bahamian delegate that the athlete should have been disqualified in the first instances where there was a false start, because after the video showed that he did false start, so they lodged a protest. That protest was then upheld by the jury of appeal. The Jamaican delegation then protested the protest because I think there was some discrepancy on the athlete that was identified as the one that false started. I believe the Bahamian delegation indicated that it was the athlete that won the race who false started, but then that was not the case. And the Jamaican delegation then protested the protest, and they won the protest that it was the athlete that got the bronze and not the athlete that got the gold. So there was a lot of back and forth between the jury of appeal, the Bahamian delegation, and the Jamaican delegation.
Okay.
And that's why it took so long.
Okay. Almost got confused there, but I hope you understand the point in regards to discretion being used and the subsequent protests in regards to that discretion. But my question now is straight in regards to that particular race. Wasn't there a reaction time?
Yes, there was. Now,
So,
what happened there, I could not tell you. I could not tell you because we did have the reaction block set. Now, the exact detail as to why that did not register, I cannot answer that question.
Oh, so it was a case of it not being registered.
I cannot, like I said, I cannot answer that question right now. But yes, we did have the block sensors on. Why it was not picked up, or what? I can't answer that.
Are you going to be getting a report on that issue?
Yes, definitely.
Go ahead.
Yes, I think that is a very valid question as to why that was not used. And I cannot answer why the jury of appeal did not use that in their decision making.
Is that the reason why the protest would have been based on the video evidence that would have been used?
That is correct. That is correct.
I find that a little bit strange, Sir Lance.
Yeah. I think this is the start of the 110-meter hurdles. Yan Shakwan was third and lost his third place based on a belated disqualification for what was deemed to be a false start. When the meet started, David, there was an approach by the organizers that gave us the feeling that the spirit of a friendly games would be pursued here. I speak specifically of the Guyanese getting in late and the meet officials extending the invitation for them to go straight on in the events despite missing the heats. I gather there was some bit of a protest there, but I think the Guyanese would have welcomed that, and that sort of set the tone initially on the opening day for an inclusive and friendly approach to the games. Having said that, are you then disappointed that over the ensuing days 2 and 3, a lot of the teams didn't feel that way about the approach from the organizers?
I mean, that comes as a surprise to me that the teams felt that it was not a friendly environment. But we certainly made all effort to showcase the athletes from around the region and to make them all feel welcome. So that comes as a surprise to me. Generally, working with all the coaches and the athletes, I did not see that, feel that atmosphere. They did have, friendly competition. At the end of the day, each delegation, each country, each athlete wants to come out on top.
Yeah, and I made the point that I think that it was a good gesture to allow the Guyanese to compete, even though they arrived in Nassau late and would have missed the preliminaries. I thought it was a good gesture there. But if I go further to, let's say, Monday's morning session, where the Jamaican long jumper Dejani Bruce was called for a foul in her jump, when our television replays, slow-mos, and still done by the producer showed clearly that it was not a foul. and the officials insisted for about 7 or 8 minutes that it was a foul. So I think the Jamaicans were a little offset by that.
Yeah,
It was cleared eventually, but there was a lot of resistance from the long jump officials on that.
Yeah, but again, I'm not made aware of that controversy, but certainly we try to use modern technology so that these things would not happen. We had a camera posted at the long jump board, as they do at IAAF events now, where they don't even use the human eye now to declare no jump. So for that to have happened, my apologies to the athlete. I was not aware of that, but that should not have happened because, like you said, we have modern technology that identify these things, and at the end of the day, we're all humans and we all have to make mistakes. But it's one thing to own up to your mistakes when you make it, and if that was the case at the long jump, certainly the officials should have owned up to it and not pursue the call.
I want to understand the post-mortem, the process, in the aftermath of you getting the report. If and when you see the list of controversies, if you will, or mishaps or mistakes that would have been made, what will happen in the aftermath of you seeing that report?
Okay, I'm not going to sit here and give a statement on what will happen. There is a post-mortem tomorrow with the technical delegate and all of the competition committee members. And certainly these are the kind of things that we will be going through. As a matter of fact, it was just given to me. This is the what you call it again, the recall blocks that we're going to go through, and those are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at, what happened in the hurdles. So all of those are right here on this paper here. So we will go through all of that to ensure that whatever happened, we learn from it, and we own up to it, and we ensure that it does not happen again. Because we stand to host a number of upcoming major events, such as the Bahama Games, the World Relays next year, and certainly we will be hoping to host Carifta in a not too distant future again. So it's definitely our intention to learn from this, and whoever sits in the seat of the competition director will hear from this current committee and ensure that all of the shortcomings that we may have had is not gone through again.
David Charlton, great having you on the Sportsmax Zone, competition director of the Carifta Games. Congratulations on a wonderful weekend of competition. The athletes certainly from the Caribbean advertising to no less a person than Lord Sebastian Coe, the head of World Athletics, who was there, as he usually is, and very impressed with a lot of what happened over the weekend in Nassau, and a very memorable weekend for all the fans, both in the stadium at Thomas A. Robinson and the viewers on Sportsmax television. Thanks, David, and keep up your work as an administrator of track and field in the Bahamas.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, back with more on the Sportsmax Zone. Still more Carifta talk coming up after the break.
Stay with Sportsmax on YouTube and follow us on all social pages for updates, news and entertainment.
Fellow citizens, near and far, join Newrish Nital on Sugar City 90.3 for Fear No Favor.
Where is the cancer man? No runner come out for war.
Tune in to 90.3 on your FM dial. Log on to SugarCityFMSankits.com or download Simple Radio app from the Google Play Store. And join Newrish Nital every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. as Newrish Nital tackles the issues and take your call. Fear No Favor every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on Sugar City 90.3 FM.
Let's unite and stand up.
Welcome back to Fear in Our Favor. And of course, we could not have just shown you or let you listen to the controversies at the Carifta, knowing that we had a young man, Bassier High School, the village area, Jevon Francis' son, the grandson of Justin Francis. We're talking about a Kenya Samuel Francis. And I think it is only fair that we allow some persons who didn't get a chance to see that race and saw the reaction of the young man to get a view of that. So we'll now have a look at it.
The field of 52.76. He's in lane number 3. The teammate Bennett under 54 seconds. But after that, a tight battle, leading the battle for bronze on time, the Bahamian Quinton Roll. He's in lane 3.
Again, 2 Bahamians, 2 Jamaicans. Let's see if it's a 2-nation race.
Well, St. Kitts and Nevis is there. They're high quality in track and field as well.
Athletes going through their final paces. The high jump bar in the under 17 boys event now at 2 meters. Maybe we'll get a close-up look at the closing stages of that one. Critical juncture for the event. Number of finals going on. All great action.
Roll 4th last time in the hurdles, and Francis 5th, and both of them will be eyeing a place on that construction that gets you to the medals, the podium.
Yeah, it looks like Caleb Campbell of Trinidad and Tobago, who is trying to go clear at 2 meters in that high jump. Doesn't go over that time. First attempt for the Trinbagonian. Once again, Wendell Williams didn't lie when he said that strength of the Trinidad and Tobago team, the jumps, spoke about the hurdles as well. And we're definitely seeing that on show. 400 hurdles final for under 17 boys. Also there. Quinton Roll of Bahamas in 3, DeAndre Gale of Jamaica in 4, DeMarco Bennett of Jamaica in 5, and Davis of Bahamas in 6, and Francis Samuel of St. Kitts and Nevis in lane number 7. They're on their marks. Off they go. 400 meters hurdles finals. Final for under 17 boys. DeMarco Bennett of Jamaica in lane number 5. The tall figure steadily going down the backstretch. Hurdling technique can use some work, stuttering into the barriers. Allows his teammate to get closer to him. That's DeAndre Gale. Gale coming through now on the third 100. Samuel Francis of St. Kitts and Nevis on the outside having a big run as well. It's the 2 Jamaicans and the Kittitian. The Bahamians with work to do to challenge for a medal. DeAndre Gale of Jamaica leads. On the outside from St. Kitts and Nevis taking over. Samuel Francis strikes gold. Big finish for him. And St. Kitts and Nevis have their first gold medal at Carifta 50. That is what it means to him. 54.14. Akanius Samuel Francis delivers a stunning performance from the outside. And Olaf Bastier is jumping for joy from Nassau. What a performance.
This is why we run the races. Can't post these medals off to the favorites on paper. Francis in the final last year, no medal. Make sure at the second try that he stands atop the podium with gold.
Watch this, teammate Huggins secured the bronze medal in that race. This time around, he is the one who steps up big way. No qualifying races in the under 17 boys 400 hurdles. And so we see them over this event for the first time. at these games. And the Canadian Samuel Francis delivers his country's first gold medal at Carifta 50.
In some style as well, and an outside lane draw compared to the other favorites. Roll and the two Jamaicans are top rated coming in, and you can see him busy on the backstretch. DeMarco Bennett, the tall boy, hurdling first as we speak, and then Gale gets on his bicycle, starts to close on Bennett and starts to take command into the lead. And at this point, Gale, Jamaica, hurdling first to hurdle number 7. As they come to hurdle number 8 at the top of the straightaway, the condition shifts gear into top gear. Francis in the lead at hurdle number 9 and pulling away towards a glorious victory here in the stadium in Nassau, and gives his country a gold medal, well deserved.
Great fight shown by the Bahamian Quinton Roll, but he missed out on a medal with 55.44. Bronze to Bennett of Jamaica, 55.27. Silver to Gale of Jamaica, 55.10. And the Carifta champion in the under 17 400 meters hurdles, Akanye Samuel Francis of St. Kitts and Nevis.
At last year's Carifta Games.
Final of the under 20 girls 4x100 meters.
Come back to fear in our favor. You know what was rather unfortunate with that 400-meter hurdle? The commentators, the lady decided that it seems as if they're going to have a two-nation competition between the two athletes from Jamaica and the two athletes from the Bahamas. And then the gentleman, who seems as if he knows something about the athletes from St. Kitts, he indicated where St. Kitts has a very good athletic program and they're doing well, and so we can't count them out, so to speak. But they actually thought that the competition would have just been between the two Jamaicans and the two Bahamians. And that is why races, you have to go on the track. Paper time. And even though he was in lane 7, and usually we see that lane as a sort of disadvantage lane, because you're out front, you cannot see the people coming behind you, while those in front of you can see you. And in lane 7, you have everybody to your left. Everybody to your left. Whereas when you're in lane 3 or 4, you have persons to your left and some to your right, so you can gauge your time and know how much more effort you have to put in. And from a difficult lane, with respect to knowing what's going on, knowing everybody was behind him. It's not like in lane 4 he could see who in front and who to his left, who to his right. And I think he must really be commended highly for running such an excellent race. The commentator said that last Carifta, he apparently came 5th. Remember, he was just about 14. Now he's 15, and maybe last time it was just for the exposure. But I know that he has been doing extremely well, and I want to congratulate him. But by the way, he was supposed to be in math class today. I did not see him today. It's Thursday. Maybe he took off, still recovering from the excitement. But I expect to see him in my math class on Saturday, and I want to say congratulations. I want to actually shake his hand and wish him well for the Grenada edition of Carifta. On that note, I think that we had a pretty decent show tonight. We dealt with gunshot wounds with one of our two general surgeons, Dr. Natalie Osborne. And I think that those of you who missed it, you can go online and get the information from there. See if we can get the youngsters them to behave themselves and let them to understand how difficult it is and the medical staff at our hospital. And those of you getting ready for music festival, I understand that it's quite a hefty price to pay to bring that sort of entertainment and certain people to our show, but that is for next time. Thank you for listening and enjoy what is left next 2 hours that remain of today. Thank you.
The opinions and statements made by the host